I just want to thank you all for coming here today and talk about something that's very intriguing to me, and that's emerging diseases in marine mammals and in the aquatic ecosystem kind of as a whole. In the past, well, since 1940, 335 new diseases have emerged on this planet. That's in humans. A lot of my training is in human pathology, and a lot of what I refer to today is has to do with humans. Well, at the same time, older diseases like malaria, cholera, and tuberculosis, diseases that we thought we had under control in human beings, have really undergone a global resurgence. They've come back. The reason for this is controversial, but a lot of scientists believe that it's due to what's called an environmental distress syndrome, whereby climatic and ecologic factors that are occurring on this planet right now, some associated with human activities, are actually encouraging the selection of new pathogens, and that's why we're seeing this phenomena. But I'm sure you're all aware of things like SARS, Ebola virus, HIV/AIDS. These are one of the a few of the 335 diseases that have come back. Well, the same thing is happening in the aquatic environment, but it's probably a little less publicized, and it's what I want to talk about today. One of the things that we can do with marine mammals is use them as sentinels. They're very good sentinel species. They're very good indicators for what's happening in our environment on this planet, because they're feed high on the food chain. They're fairly long-lived animals. A lot of them are coastal species. Therefore, what impacts our coastal ecosystems impacts us. A lot of them have site fidelity. They stay in one place for a long period of time. Many of these have specific fat stores, blubber, that serves as depots for toxins that humans put in the environment. And probably most important is the fact that they're charismatic. People love marine mammals. And because of that, they attract more public attention. And Nico and Maris and Natasha will attest to that. But they also, because of that, they attract political attention as well, and therefore you can get things done. So what I want to talk about today are some diseases that have emerged in these animals. I'm a pathologist, so I have to show you some photomicrographs, I'm sorry. But if your eyes start to glass over, I know that I'm doing too much of that. But I picked some slides that I think are very revealing about what's happening to these animals. And the take-home message here is what's happening to these animals also has the impact of happening to us. One of the things that I've been involved with is actually doing studies with health assessment data. We actually catch animals, we give them a physical exam. This is a health assessment we do in Mexico, in the jungles in Mexico. This is one we do in dolphins in Florida. This is an ultrasound. But the idea is we collect these animals, we go out, we give them a Mayo Clinic-like physical, and we let them go. And then we follow them through time to see what's happening and how we can better understand what's going on with the health of these animals. This is a project now that's based out of Georgia Aquarium. We have a health assessment program in Florida now, based out of here, and in South Carolina. So if anybody, and I encourage volunteers to come out on these projects. So if any of you are interested, you can get a hold of me. Our next project probably will be in June of 2009. This is a dolphin from one of our health assessment programs. These are resolving pox lesions. And 100% of the dolphins in our first year had this disease. This is highly unusual. You would expect the population of about 2% of dolphins to have this type of cutaneous lesion. 100% in 2003 had this, wild dolphins. And the next year about 80%, and it fluctuated, but very, very high incidence of dolphin pox, again indicating some sort of stressor going on in the environment. We're seeing similar lesions now in right whales. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get our hands on these for obvious logistics reasons, but you can see this is a very similar type of lesion in a northern right whale, the most endangered whale species, baleen whale on the planet. It's right off the coast of Georgia here where they breed or give birth. Switch to Pinnipeds Sea Lions. This disease is called urogenital carcinoma, cancer of the urinary tract. This is an animal on autopsy, and you can see the liver here is covered with these little nodules throughout the stomach and the mesentery here. This occurs in usually adult California sea lions, in wild animals. It's a highly aggressive tumor. It spreads very, very quickly. It's highly metastatic, and it kills the animals. If you look at this tumor under the microscope, these are tumor cells, but the interesting thing here is the tumor cells have these very large, what are called inclusion bodies associated with the herpes virus, a new emerging disease. Switching to this oral lesion, this is a disease that really we just started to see in early 2000, and it was very interesting because it occurred about the same time around the planet. I have a lot of work that I do in various parts of the world, and we started seeing this just about at the same time. And what it is are these plaque-like lesions on the tongue of bottlenose dolphins and in the genital mucosa area. If we work this thing up, we see some of these. This occurs in free-ranging and animals under human care. This was particularly striking to me, the symmetry of this lesion on the tongue of this dolphin, of this white fissured lesion. This reminded me when I was a pathology resident doing human autopsies of a disease called hairy leukoplakia in humans that's seen in people with HIV/AIDS and have transplant immune suppression. It's caused in humans by an Epstein-Barr virus, which is a type of herpes virus. So that kind of raised my interest in looking at this a little bit more. Electron microscope photo of a tumor cell from one of these lesions, and this is about probably about 25,000 power. This is the nucleus of the cell in here, nuclear membrane, and this is a virus going through the nuclear membrane and getting a capsule. Classic for a herpes virus. So this is a brand new gamma herpes virus that we discovered in all of these tumors. One of my postdocs isolated, cloned, and actually sequenced a new papillomavirus, what's called Tertiaps truncatus. That's the genus species of a dolphin, bottlenose dolphin, PV2. We've actually sequenced 4 new viruses. These are mucosatrophic. These are viruses that love the mucosa, the mouth, and particularly the genital area. These are the lesions in other mammals, particularly humans, that are very aggressive. They transform to cancer, particularly cervical cancer. You may have heard of the new vaccine for human cervical cancer is made to a few of the human types of PV that are found that are associated with this. So we have a papillomavirus involved with this as well. Again, very, very complex diseases. Our concern is that this tumor in dolphins becomes malignant. It transforms from a benign tumor of the tongue to a malignant tumor called squamous cell carcinoma. And what's really interesting, this tumor in humans, this is associated with people that may smoke or have chewless tobacco. The tumors tend to be locally aggressive. They don't typically spread. They tend to be local problems, and they can be life-threatening local problems, but they don't spread to the rest of your body. In dolphins, these tumors spread widely. They're highly metastatic. They spread to the brain, they spread to the liver, the lungs. So this is a very, very bad tumor. And we're seeing it again in a lot of the benign tumors in free-ranging animals, and benign going to malignant in animals under human care. And the take-home message here is that this is a complex disease. We feel that it's triggered by a papillomavirus. The papillomavirus comes in and causes the benign tumor to form. There has to be a herpes virus cofactor and probably other things that are involved with the immune system. This is an emerging disease. What's interesting is as I said, it progresses to cancer, can cause, it can be actually triggered to grow by pregnancy. So we're concerned that these free-ranging animals are going to be impacted by this. And if you see the emerging, in 2003, at least in our study population, no animals had this. 2004, 11%, and 2005, 47%. It really took off in this population. And so it's transmissible. It's a transmissible tumor, and it's probably sexually transmitted. We'll move now to some other diseases. This is a disease that's fascinating. It's a fungal disease called lobomycosis. It's caused by this fungus. Way back when I was a resident, we associated this disease with immune suppression. We see a fairly high level of this in our study area in Florida. And you can see these grossly disfiguring lesions, but this is an animal that's in severe problems right now. This is what we call peanut head. This is an area of fat behind the blowhole that is absorbed when the animal's sick. So this animal's kind of in a metabolic meltdown, very similar to the kind of metabolic issues you see in people that have cancer. We just published a paper just a few months back now. These animals are profoundly immune suppressed. Their immune systems are like HIV/AIDS patients. They can't fight off, they don't have any antibodies, and they don't have what's called cell-mediated immunity. So this is more or less a symptom of something more insidious, like your immune system isn't functioning. And right now we're looking at environmental factors for immune suppression causing this particular disease. This disease is only found in humans and dolphins. So it possibly can be transmitted back and forth, so it's something we want to look at. And again, not in captive dolphins. This is mainly a free-ranging dolphin issue. These are my daughters. There's nothing to do with this lecture. Just want to see there are a few eyes going back there. All right. We're going to switch to something that's very important that has implications for everyone in this room. These are harmful algal blooms. There's a global pandemic of this problem. These are dinoflagellates, algae that are proliferating. These algae produce very highly toxic compounds. One of the best known is red tide toxin. This is a red tide. And probably the first mention of this problem was biblical in the Bible, in Exodus. But the point is that these are naturally occurring toxins, but these things are proliferating. Saxitoxins cause paralytic shellfish poisoning in humans. This is the second most potent toxin on the planet, natural toxin. If you want to do work with this toxin, you have to be cleared by Homeland Security. It's a highly potent neurotoxin. Brevet toxins are the red tide toxins, very complex, causing neurotoxic shellfish poisoning in humans. And then there are others. Domoic acid is an issue in areas of California particularly, and then we have other toxins. Well, I'm going to talk mainly about brevet toxins. This is a problem that's occurring traditionally on the west coast of Florida, but now it's moving on the east coast and even up into Georgia. This is satellite imagery of chlorophyll from a red tide bloom on the west coast. But like I said, the way the currents are taking it, can take it around and up on the east coast of Florida and Georgia. These toxins cause massive fish kills. They impact turtles, particularly loggerheads and seabirds, mainly through their neurotoxic effects on the nervous system. This is the dinoflagellate microscopically that produces the toxins. There are at least 9 toxins It's a very complex a group of toxins, and what happens is, how many here have been in a red tide? Okay, the main thing, if you remember, is that it's very irritating to your respiratory tract. It causes your eyes to tear and coughing. When the surf breaks these dinoflagellates apart, the toxins are aerosolized. The toxins have neurotoxic properties. They bind sodium-gated channels. They're neurotoxic, but there are other properties of the toxins that I think are more important. There are properties that cause hemolysis, breakdown of your red blood cells that can lead to anemia. And now we've found that they're immune suppressive effects. And the way humans get intoxicated is by eating shellfish, but my concern now is more the inhaled toxin. The chronic inhaling of this toxin produces problems. Again, marine mammals are good sentinels for this toxin, particularly bottlenose dolphins and manatees. Excuse me. About 17% of the annual manatee mortality is due to this toxin. Manatees are endangered species. I got involved in the largest die-off of an endangered species ever back in the late 90s. 150 manatees died. We didn't know what was causing it at the time, but since then we were able to diagnose it, and you can see this fluctuating mortality from these toxins. What's interesting is in the first study we found in this 150 manatees that 100% of them had catarrhal rhinitis. All this means is that they had inflammation of the nasal cavity. It's like when you have a cold, you have catarrhal rhinitis. It doesn't kill you. So this, to me, was striking. The reason why these animals were dying is they were bleeding into their lungs. So they were actually hemorrhaging into the lungs with a lot of fluid. That was killing them. That's a very non-specific cause of death. It can be caused by many different things. And then they had other more non-specific lesions. Deposition of iron is called hemosiderosis, meaning red blood cells were being destroyed. So this was confusing because we eliminated infectious causes here, and we were left with these rather peculiar set of lesions that didn't lead us to a diagnosis. We did find particularly high levels of the red tide organism associated with this, but we couldn't make the correlation. So what my lab did is we developed a technique to detect the presence, abundance, and distribution of toxin. And this was a novel technique at the time, but this is a photomicrograph, and where you see the brown pigment is toxin. Typically we don't see toxins under the microscope, so we're left clueless when we have an intoxication. But this technique allows us to see the actual presence of toxins. So this is a lymph node actually from a manatee from the die-off. You can see all these cells are packed with toxin. This is a control lymph node from an animal that wasn't in the die-off, and you see no toxin. So this is the first time this has been done. So we're able to detect, again, the presence of this toxin in very high levels. Then we found that they're vectors. They're actually carriers of these biotoxins. And typically what we used were cell counts of the dinoflagellate. Here we see cell counts dropping. Here's where the manatee started to die with this little star. So it didn't make sense that the cell counts of the organism producing the toxins were decreasing, but the manatees started to die here. So what we did was we looked at seagrass, and the toxins can be concentrated in seagrass. These are vegetarians, and what happens is in the absence of the organism that makes the toxins now, toxins are found in seagrass. The animals eat the seagrass, they die in the absence of the organism. So this was very interesting. We also found that at the same time fish, dolphins were dying too, and fish were actually vectors too. We used to think fish, once they became loaded with the toxin, die. But now we know some fish species can actually concentrate the toxin, live, the dolphins eat the fish, and then they get intoxicated. So there's a potential for humans to get this poisoning this way as well. If you correlate human disease, particularly emergency room diagnosis involving lung issues during a red tide year. You can see respiratory diagnosis go up 54%. These toxins trigger asthma severely. These cause, if you're asthmatic, the inhalation of just a little of this toxin triggers an asthma attack. But it also causes all these other pulmonary diseases and not an asthmatic. So there's a potential here for inhaling this toxin and causing significant human disease. So in reality, manatees are like the Florida's 2,000-pound canary. They're indicators of what's going on. They get intoxicated by the toxin the same way as people, by ingestion or inhalation, particularly inhalation. We now know there are new carrier mechanisms. Again, this is being poisoned in the absence of the organism. And probably the most important take-home here are other effects of inhaling this toxin. And what we found now is chronic low-level exposure to the toxin causes your immune system to shut down. So if you're exposed to red tide toxin for long periods of time, you're more prone to get other diseases. Again, a very complex thing, but this is a trigger for us to be aware that this may trigger other problems in human beings that are inhaling this same toxin. So this is something that we should pay attention to because, as I said earlier, there's a global pandemic of these intoxications going on. We'll talk about this disease. Pygmy and dwarf sperm whales are the second most common stranded marine mammal along the east coast of the United States. These are in the sperm whale family. The big Moby Dick is a sperm whale, but there are other two smaller species. This is an adult stranded pygmy sperm whale. They are 15 feet long, maybe 1,800 pounds. Very interesting animals. They have you can see right here, it's called a false gill slit. Obviously they're mammals and don't have gills, but they have what's called this gill slit, a kind of skewed blowhole here, very underslung jaw, very tiny needle-shaped teeth for grabbing squid, which is what they eat. Very interesting animals, and we don't know too much about them besides the fact that they get a heart disease called cardiomyopathy. Cardiomyopathy is a kind of a pathologic term for disease of unknown origin of the heart. There are a lot of forms of cardiomyopathy. You may hear about athletes that go out on the basketball court and appear totally normal and fall over dead. And that's a type of cardiomyopathy in humans. Dogs get a form of cardiomyopathy. Some horses do. But this was the first time we looked at this. Again, when I was back when I was a resident, we diagnosed this, and then we followed up recently with another paper on what this disease means. What we did is this is the heart that we were able to section, and we took very discrete areas of the heart and looked at them under the microscope. And I don't think you need to be a pathologist here. This is a normal heart. These are cardiomyocytes. These are the cells of your heart. Your heart looks the same, I hope. These are normal cells. The nuclei kind of line up like schooling fish. This is a sick heart. There's a lot of space between these cells. The nuclei are very large and kind of lined up abnormally, and you get this whirling of fibers. This is a classic cardiomyopathy, and this is killing these whales. The scientific name for this whale is Kogia. And again, this is a complex disease. The take-home message here is this is end-stage disease. It's a mixed form of cardiomyopathy, but what we feel now is that this is a complex disease associated with probably biotoxins. Domoic acid is a biotoxin. These animals have very high levels of mercury in them. A man-made toxin, a very toxic heavy metal put in the environment mainly through man's activities. And there's probably a stress-related component here. Acute stress reactions. You know, when you get scared, your fingers tingle. You know, we feel that. This is a release of what it's called catecholamines. And we feel that these whales may be changing their diving patterns. and because of shifts in food supply and causing these acute releases of these stress hormones and then chronic stress. At any rate, very complex and a disease that's killing about almost 40% of these whales on the beach. One of the things we're doing now is, you may not be aware, Georgia Aquarium has a dolphin conservation field station at Marineland that's coming online at the end of next year, I believe. And it's going to allow us to really study stranded animals a little bit more. This is near St. Augustine. So we're going to have pools there to do more stranding work. But what we're doing with these animals is trying to understand the animals, what's happening to the heart. So this is a Pygmy sperm whale in the water here, stranding pool, and we're doing an echocardiogram on the heart. So this will be done at the new Georgia Aquarium field station. Now I'm going to wind up with some of our health assessment study data. And this really has impact for everyone sitting here in this room. A lot of people say, well, why do you spend so much money looking at dolphin health? Well, we look at dolphin health not only because as a veterinarian I'm concerned about their health, but the impact of this has impact for us, because what's happening for the ecosystem, ocean health, which directly impacts us. So this is one field. We look at antibiotic resistance. We look at a bacteria called E. coli. E. coli, as you may be aware, is found in fecal samples. You have E. coli in your intestinal tract. Very common bacteria, many different types. But we culture E. coli, and then we expose the culture to 25 antibiotics. Now, these are wild dolphins, and they've never been on antibiotics, so theoretically they should not have any antibiotic resistance because they've never been put on antibiotics. So we looked at this, and we actually found this percentage is actually higher now. It's about 25%. We found antibiotic resistance in Indian River Lagoon dolphins in Florida. Now, how do they get antibiotic resistance? In the water. And in the water through how? Through pollution, through sewage runoff. And what's interesting, in the antibiotics they're resistant to, ampicillin, amoxicillin, penicillin, these antibiotics are human antibiotics or small animal antibiotics. And these last three are typically large animal antibiotics. So we know we have fecal runoff in this area, or sewage runoff. So that's the likely source of these antibiotic resistance from overuse of antibiotics in humans. And then Florida, which many people don't know, this area of Florida is a very high beef producing area, and we feel that the fecal runoff from cattle for these antibiotics is causing the resistance to these. The point is we're breeding these super bugs. We're building these super bacteria that have antibiotic resistance to antibiotics which we routinely use in humans. And the point here is that if these bacteria are resistant, there are a lot of different bacteria, a lot of other bacteria that are resistant that could be life-threatening to us. We get this bacteria back on the dolphin poops, right? We recreate in the water, we drink the water, and then we have a problem because we have potential pathogens that are resistant to these antibiotics. So we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot here. So this is very concerning, and one of the things that the CDC here is particularly interested in these environmental issues with these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. We look at toxins, anthropogenic toxins, toxins that are put in the environment by man. We look at PBDEs, these are flame retardants, classic legacy pollutants, PCBs and DDT. DDT's been outlawed in this country since the early 70s, but we're still picking up very high concentrations. Doesn't break down. PFASs are stain repellents. These all can have profound impact on health of lab animals and in some instances humans. So we have a concern not only for the dolphin population coastally that are exposed to these, but the human population that are exposed to the same toxins. This is particularly, this data is from South Carolina, and the government now is interested in looking through our project here at the aquarium at dolphins along coastal Georgia, particularly Brunswick area. So we're going to take this study to, again, based out of the aquarium here, to look at Georgia dolphins as well. And then the final slide here. Mercury, as I said, is one of the most toxic heavy metals on this planet. How many of you remember the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland? Okay. Mad Hatter, they used to line hats with mercury to keep the hat, I guess, fitted and sized and everything. You put the hat on and the mercury is absorbed through your skin, and the mercury makes you go mad. It's a neurotoxin. Little trivia for your next trivia party. So it's a very, it's a deadly toxin. And for some reason, Florida dolphins have, in Florida, mercury is a problem, and we don't know why, because generally mercury is put in the environment through industry and through coal-generated power plants, et cetera. We don't have a lot of that in Florida, especially in this area. But the mercury burdens are astounding. Total mercury is 4 to 5 times higher in the blood and skin in Florida dolphins than in Charleston dolphins. Methyl mercury, which is the toxic organic compound, is at a level that's higher than beluga whales in the St. Lawrence Seaway that are associated with mercury-associated cancer. So the skin of these dolphins have higher mercury levels than the belugas in St. Lawrence that have been proven to have cancer associated with high toxin levels. And then, to me, the astounding thing is total methyl mercury. Total mercury is 21 times higher than what our government's allows us to consume in fish in the skin of these dolphins, and 11 times higher than for the toxic compound methyl mercury. So we feel that probably dolphins have some ability to buffer this toxin, because these are astounding levels. But what's it mean for the coastal population that's eating the same thing? They're getting this intoxication through eating fish. Dolphins are piscivorous. They eat fish all day long. So what's it mean for the people that are living along the coastlines that are consuming the same fish? So this is something that we're particularly interested in looking at in future studies. So if you look, just the final, if you look at I locked up 6 veterinarians in a room for 3 days, and we looked at 200, which was an amazing feat. It's like herding cats, 230 animals. And we have so much data. I just wanted to look at this from a clinical basis. And we classified animals as normal, possibly diseased, meaning if we were clinicians, we would want to do further workup on these animals, and definitely diseased, no question. In the Indian River Lagoon, less than half, 39%, were normal. In Charleston, the numbers were higher, and the percentage that were diseased was just, to me, it's a very worrisome trend that we're seeing. As I said, we want to do this in Georgia. Again, this whole project is based out of the aquarium now. And what to me is astounding is, not astounding, it actually makes sense, is that when we compare the free-ranging studies that we do with dolphins in the wild and whales in the wild, and we look at the same thing with dolphins under human care and whales under human care, the animals under human care are healthier than the animals in the wild. The question on whether there's an HIV equivalent in cetaceans, and we don't have any evidence right now. There probably is a retrovirus in these animals that we just haven't discovered. But I feel that the immune suppression that we're seeing is not due to one single thing. It's due to many things. Immune suppression due to toxins, whether it's biotoxins or mercury or PCBs. Immunosuppression to environmental change, temperature change. Temperature change in the oceans, just a couple degrees can be profound, and that's happening. So I think the immune suppression is probably not single cause, it's many causes. Yes. The question is a good question, what comes first? And most of these diseases, particularly the fungal disease and some of the viral diseases I described, we feel that the immunosuppression probably comes first and triggers these things out of latency. But it's a good question that needs more work. Yes. The question was whether or not we can do anything with morbillivirus. That was the particular case. And the logistics of vaccinating or doing something through free-ranging pelagic species is very difficult, and that I don't think has even been considered. But that would be the only way you could really address this issue. But certain morbillivirus is interesting because animals that survive are immune for a certain period of time, and those are some of the things we're looking at now. Yes. The question was whether or not the dolphin study I was talking about was discrete, and yes, it is. It's the Indian River Lagoon, and the lagoon is about 165. For those you don't know, about 165 miles long from Cape Canaveral down to Jupiter, Florida. It takes up about a third of the west or the east coast, the Atlantic coastline. Well, what's interesting about that study area is the animals they live there just about most of their life. This is what's interesting to me. They have site fidelity. They don't leave that area. So I think this is an ecosystem-based problem based, in this specific area. But studies like this really haven't been. There's a well-organized study on the west coast of Florida, but the rest of the world studies this in depth really haven't been done. Yes. The question was, do we know if the red tide, the specific Florida red tide is getting worse? And it's very controversial, but a lot of scientists say it is, and a lot of scientists say it's due to nutrient loading in the environment. The question was whether or not, I guess the general question, whether swimming with dolphins impacts their health or immune system. And we have very good solid data because these types of programs, these encounter programs are really very common now all around the world, that these programs don't at all impact the health of the animals. In fact, they enrich the health of the animals because they give them more environmental enrichment to be in their daily routine. It's important to remember that all these diseases that I described here in the human disease issue, most of these diseases are species specific. In other words, all the viruses I talked about are only found in marine mammals, and most of all the viruses I'm aware of in humans aren't transmitted back and forth. So besides a few bacterial exceptions, the chances of any disease transmission are very, very, very low for these types of programs. And there's been, because they've been around since the mid-90s, or even earlier, we have good data to support that. Any other questions? Well, thanks. Appreciate it.